In my continuing quest to produce a reasonable crucible, I wanted to talk about pottery types for a minute. So there are essentially three types of pottery. I didn't know this, but I read it online. There's earthenware, stoneware, and porcelain. And they are distinguished by the kinds of clay that are used to make the pottery. So I think that we could say, I used kind of a low-grade clay for this, so I think we could say that this is kind of my version of earthenware. One of the ways you know that this is a kind of a low-temperature clay is what we saw with all of my high-temperature melting experiments. These things deform, they run, they melt, they glassify early. So we'll call that earthenware. In terms of crucible technology, this is more of a stoneware because it's exposed to the same amount of heat, and it did vitrify significantly. I mean, I melted iron in this thing. It vitrified significantly, but it didn't melt. It didn't deform, and it didn't run. It did stick a little bit, but that's stoneware. And here's porcelain. So porcelain is made with a clay with an extremely high melting point, and it's actually pre-vitrified, if you will. When you fire it, you pre-vitrify it. So the vitrification is okay, but you see that these things were exposed to the same amount of heat, and this thing is obviously much more resistant than this. So earthenware, stoneware, porcelain. I suppose I could go the route of stoneware, but I've decided instead that I want to just try to go ahead and directly make porcelain because it's not really any more expensive, and it's going to save me an awful lot in wear and tear on my products. So the formula for the porcelain I'm going to make is really just three things. It's somewhat different from this stuff that I made, which has silicon carbide, clay, a little bit of powdered borosilicate glass, and graphite in it. This has three ingredients. The first one is a high temperature clay. This is kaolin clay. Bought it from some online thing. I love what it says. It's a great exfoliating clay for normal, dry, and sensitive skin, and you should use it to make bath fizzies. So I'm about to go have a bath fizzy, and honestly, in pretty much the same way as I did with all of my leftover zinc oxide. I think I'll stuff some up my ass. So the second thing I need is feldspar. So feldspar is a mineral, and I obtained it by buying this stuff, which, if you look, says soap and feldspar, and I just washed the soap out of it. And so you get this powdered stuff here, very finely powdered. My last ingredient is silicon dioxide. So I think the classic recipe would use powdered quartz, but this stuff, this play sand, is, if you look at it under the microscope, extremely fine rounded particles of what's got to be pretty darn pure silicon dioxide. It's probably desert sand because beach sand is not smooth like that. Now it's a little thick in consistency, so I'm going to drop it in the ball mill for a couple of weeks and see if I can powder it up a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and make some stuff. So I have everything I need now to make my porcelain clay. Here's my white kaolin clay, powdered, dried, that which has not yet gone up somebody's posterior. Here's my washed feldspar. You'll be happy to know, by the way, that that is 276 grams of washed feldspar, and the Bon Ami was 340 grams, so looks like I lost about 75 grams, close, 65 grams. Some of which was definitely feldspar, but most of which I suspect was soap. Then here's my tumbled sand, which is now sand powder, and which I am calling my source of silicon dioxide. I believe that some porcelains use something called frit, which essentially is powdered glass. I have that too from my ball milling back in August if I need it. So let's mix up some clay and see if we can turn it into slip, and we'll try doing a slip cast with porcelain. So what I'm seeing is I need 50% clay, I need 25% of feldspar, I need 25% of my tumbled sand. So that should be easy. Let's start with 500, 250, and 250. That's 500 grams of kaolin clay. $250 grams of feldspar. Not much feldspar left. $250 grams of sand, so that's 1 kilogram of dry ingredients. Let's see how much we get when we wet that. So what I have is really a very nice slip with a beautiful texture. It's clear that that tumbled sand was really finely divided, or it never would have turned out anywhere near that pretty. It's got a very goopy, which is the way I like it, because I'm trying to get a nice thick slip casting. I've poured it into my standard regular old slip casting crucible form, because again, I'm not that worried about whiteness. I just really want to get the temperature resistance. So I'm going to go ahead and let this absorb for a bit, and then I'll come back and unmold it, and we'll see what we have. For those of you who might be worried about my personal hygiene / backside, just rest assured I found I think it's called a high fire clay, which is used for making porcelain. And what I've decided to do is just go ahead and let it air dry and then ball mill it to a powder, because that powder mixing system seems to work well. So that's how I'll do this in the future. My ass is safe. Let's take a look at my early results from making porcelain items. There's my standard object that I made out of my other clay on multiple occasions. You'll notice that I got a little hazy in my slip casting process, so I've got some air bubbles that I should have gotten out before I slip casted that. Now this stuff's easy to recycle. It's really not very sturdy. It's a lot less sturdy than the other clay was. Hopefully when I fire that, it won't be quite so easy to break. Small crucible. This one's still quite wet, so it's soft. It turns out that it's cold in here, and this stuff sets up really slowly when it's cold, so I have to be really careful not to deform these things when they come out of the slip casting mold. This is the largest object I've ever made. It's got a really nice surface texture. It's very heavy. It's still quite cold and moist. It's going to take a long time for this to dry out so that I can fire it, but let's face it, really nice progress on that. So it's snowing outside. It's going to be a long time before I'm going to be able to fire that and see what it looks like. This is a Tier port for my big can. Actually quite pleased with that. I'm going to call that an episode. More casting to come. I'm going to try to make something even bigger than this, and I'm going to try to make 4 or 5 of these. So at some point it'll stop snowing, and I'll be able to try firing that, at least give it a low fire in some wood and charcoal to see what kind of texture it develops. Eventually I'm going to try to do a high fire, probably in the big can, once I get it refurbished. So thanks very much for watching. Please feel free to like and subscribe, or don't. If you don't want, that's fine too. Tell your friends again if you want, and if you don't want, I'm okay with that. Thanks very much for watching, and have a great day. Here's the expectation around a tier sleeve, is that I can just put the tier directly into it. So we'll see. I'm going to have to bore it out slightly.